There are less than 6 months until 2027, and you are still not profitable after all these years. So why is that? Because you probably did a lot last year. You watched more videos, you backtested more strategies, and every time you found something new, it felt like you were finally moving again. January starts with one strategy. A few weeks later, the results get uncomfortable, so one of the rules changes. Then another losing period comes, and now the entry itself starts looking like the problem. And every change feels reasonable. You're not randomly switching. You're removing bad setups. But if you keep improving something before you have enough trades to know whether it works, you're not improving it. You're restarting it. I used to do this constantly. I would find something, test it, and get so excited because the backtest looked good. Then the live version would lose a few trades, and instead of accepting that losing was part of the strategy, I would start looking for the reason those losses should have been avoided. Which is very easy to do after the trade is already over, so I added another rule. And now the old backtest didn't even matter because I was trading a different version, but in my head, I was still working on the same strategy, but I wasn't. And there is a simple way to see whether you did the same thing this year. Take the trades you are taking in January, then compare them to the setups you take now. Could both of them go inside the exact same backtest with the exact same rules? Because if the answer is no, you didn't spend 6 months getting better at one edge. You spent it repeatedly becoming a beginner at something new. And watching trading content makes this even easier because every video gives you another thing that you could change. Other reason your current strategy might not be enough. And you can spend the whole day learning and finish it further away from having something you can actually execute. That is the trap. Being busy feels like progress because you are never sitting still, but in trading, progress usually looks like doing the same boring thing long enough to get an answer. Does this strategy actually work? Instead, every losing week created a new question. And every new question needed another backtest. And now that the deadline is getting closer, the natural reaction is to move even faster, which is exactly how the second half of the year gets wasted too. At the beginning of the year, you had time. You could tell yourself you were still learning, that the strategy just needed a little more work. But now every month that passes feels like proof that you are falling behind. You don't just want to get better anymore. You want to make up for the first half of the year. A normal setup doesn't feel like enough. 5% doesn't feel like enough. Normal feels like it will take forever. Because one trade is no longer just one trade inside a sample. It is supposed to catch up with your calendar. But the market has absolutely no idea. You gave yourself a deadline. And it can give you a flat month in November while you are doing everything correctly. And in December. And this month. So most traders start forcing it. Not in some obvious stupid way. A setup is almost valid, so he takes it. Or the setup is valid, but the risk gets pushed slightly higher. And individually, none of those decisions seems to be the reason somebody stays unprofitable. But the question underneath them has changed. He is no longer asking, is this my setup? He is asking, can this trade finally move me forward? I remember one October where I was down for the month and I had decided this was the year I finally going full time. So I sat there on a Wednesday with no valid setup on the chart. And waiting felt physically impossible because waiting meant accepting that October is probably going to end in red as well. Which meant November had to carry October. So I started looking harder. And the longer I looked, the more setups I somehow found. Obviously not because the market suddenly gave me more opportunities. The chart will always give you a reason to take something. There is always a level, always some structure you can explain afterward. I took like 3-4 trades that week that were not in line with my strategy. And if I remember correctly, all of them lost. So by Friday, I wasn't behind by one bad month anymore. I was behind 1 month plus a strategy I had just stopped following. Then the worst results created even more urgency, so I pushed harder again. So here is the uncomfortable question. If you were still unprofitable on December 1st, would you trade December exactly the same way you are trading now? Same risk, same setup? Because if the honest answer is no, then the deadline is already controlling the strategy. The urgency is real, you have already wasted enough time. But using that urgency to trade faster will only waste what is left. The deadline should make you ruthless about removing everything that does not produce evidence. And before the rest of the year can change anything, there is one question you should already be able to answer by now. And it's not what strategy are you excited about. What exactly has kept you unprofitable this long? I don't know why I'm still unprofitable. It's not good enough answer anymore. Because every month, the trader looks at the results and tries to diagnose the problem from it. Profitable month, the strategy works. Losing month, something needs to change. But the result alone tells you almost nothing. And this is where I was stuck for so many years. I would have a losing period and immediately start looking at the strategy. Maybe the entry was wrong, maybe the stop needed changing. But I wasn't even checking whether I had traded the strategy properly in the first place. So sometimes I deleted a perfectly good route because of losses that came from my own execution. Then other times, I told myself to be more disciplined with something that never had an edge anyway. Both felt like working on the problem. And you can do that for years. You can backtest for hundreds of hours, then trade a completely different version live. The backtest looks profitable, the live account keeps losing. And you could say, I know my strategy works, my psychology is the problem. Maybe, but if the live trades don't match the backtest, you never traded the strategy. So you have no idea whether it would have worked. Then there is the opposite trader. He follows every rule, takes everybody's setup. But the system itself has no real edge. And now he spends another year trying to become more disciplined with something that is mathematically designed to lose. From the account balance, those two traders look identical, which is why hard work on the wrong diagnosis just makes the mistake more expensive. So there are only two questions that matter. Does this strategy actually have an edge? And am I actually executing that strategy? Not do I feel confident in it? Not did it make money last month? Because confidence can disappear after 3 losses, even when nothing is wrong. You need evidence for both. One clean backtest, big enough sample size with fixed rules. Then live trades you can compare against it without making excuses. And this is where most traders realize they have been tracking the wrong thing. They journal how they felt. They wrote down why the trade lost, but they still cannot answer whether the trade they took was the exact trade inside their data. So the trader looks at the setup and says the setup wasn't clean enough. But before the result, it looked clean enough to risk money on. That is just hindsight. Here's a test. Take every live trade for the last 3 months. Could somebody who knows your rules look through them and cleanly separate wallet execution from everything else without asking how the trade ended? Because if the answer is no, you don't have execution data. You just have random screenshots of decisions that kept changing. And the problem is that without that comparison, you cannot tell whether the edge fed or whether it was non-existent in the first place. So what the next 5 months have to produce is not payouts, it's diagnosis. I used to think one payout would answer everything. Then I got my first one and it told me nothing because I couldn't have written down the rules that produced it. So here's what the 5 months have to contain. 300 backtested trades on one fixed strategy, because almost every strategy looks good during its best 20 trades. You need to see it go flat. You need to see it lose 6 or 8 in a row and then recover. And if it cannot survive 300 trades, kill it the next month. Not because you had a bad week, but because the number says there is nothing there. And if the edge does exist, September to December has one job. Trade the live version without changing anything. You are no longer hunting for something new. You are comparing what happened live against what was already decided. And if they don't match, trade smaller. Not because smaller risk magically fixes psychology, but because you need enough repetitions to fix execution while every mistake is still cheap. 40 to 80 live trades between September and January. Not enough to make you rich, but enough to tell whether you can actually follow a strategy you tested. So on January 1st, one of two things is true. One, you have an edge you can prove and live trades that actually belong to it. Or you killed something that was never going to work and you stopped paying for it. And if you enter 2027 with the same changing strategy, watching the same videos and asking the same questions, that is not another year of trying. That is the same year repeated.